Hello again. Welcome back to Marketing 2700, Product Design and Development. I'm Brad Scheller, and this is part 3 of our series, The Journey of an Idea. Yeah, this is the long-awaited and promised part 3. I've rewritten this a few times because there really is a lot to cover, and I wanted to make sure your eyes don't roll to the back of your head. However, if you need to take a break and come back another couple hours later, feel free to do it a couple of times. Anyway, let's start by thinking for a moment about the last product you used today that truly disappointed you. Maybe it was a clunky app update. Maybe it was packaging that made no sense. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. Chances are the original concept behind that product was actually pretty good. Somebody, somewhere, had a smart idea. What went wrong wasn't the idea. It was the organizational gauntlet that idea had to survive. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. So let's get to it. 70%. Let's let that number sink in. 70%. 7 out of 10 products fail in the marketplace. They didn't fail because the idea was bad. They failed because the organization couldn't execute. Cooper and Egget's research on stage gate implementation confirms this over and over. The concept test looked good. The market research supported it. The business case penciled out nicely. But somewhere between great idea and product on the shelf, something broke. And here's what makes this personal for every one of you in this class. If you're in marketing, you probably assume the product failed because R&D didn't build what you specified. If you're in engineering, you're certain marketing never understood what was technically feasible. And if you're in finance, you're convinced everyone overpromised and underdelivered. Well, the truth? They're all right, and they're all wrong, because the real failure is coordination failure, and that's what we're going to dissect today. So when I talk about the organizational gauntlet, here's sort of what I'm talking about. There's different departments that have to work together to make a successful product, and those might include R&D, marketing, manufacturing, finance, sales, etc. And during the process of developing this new product or concept, there's handoffs between each group. And if they're not all on the same page, things fall apart. Let's take a moment to show you what happens when the gauntlet wins. So look here, 3 columns, right? There's engineering, there's manufacturing, there's finance. Boeing's 787 Dreamliner is one of the worst instructive new product development failures in modern history, not because the product was bad, but because 3 departments each made individually rational decisions that collectively created a disaster. Engineering pushed for revolutionary composite materials, lighter, stronger, more fuel efficient, technically brilliant, but it created unprecedented manufacturing complexity that nobody had dealt with before. Manufacturing wanted cost efficiency, outsourced production, and they wanted to do to over 50 suppliers across a dozen countries. Each supplier was competent, but coordinating 50 organizations building something none of them had built before, the supply chain became impossible to manage. And how about finance? Well, finance projected costs based on their experience with traditional aluminum aircraft. Reasonable benchmarks, but completely wrong. For a new manufacturing paradigm, they underestimated the true cost by billions. Now, look at the bottom banner here. Here's what makes this story painful. Each department was rational. Engineering was right that composites were the future. Manufacturing was right that outsourcing reduces unit costs. Financing was right to use historical benchmarks. But nobody was coordinating across all 3 to ask, can we actually do all of this simultaneously? And that's the organizational gauntlet in action. Now, during phase 1 of our team project, we used a methodology that looked at PESTEL analysis, market analysis, SWOT analysis, performance assessment to come up with a strategy that you were going to pursue, which included a product requirements document. And the overall new product development process has to be driven by strong analytics. And I'm going to go over each of these in the next couple of pages and talk about how they each influence what's going to come out in your strategy. But first, let me make a clear distinction between two types of decisions that happen during the new product development process. There's the strategic decisions, and then there are tactical decisions. Strategic decisions are like the big things. You've got to get it right. You got to stick with it early on in the stage gate process. It requires great resources to figure out and greater resources to change. They're more difficult and they should not be changed. Examples include things like the business strategy, the portfolio strategy, product portfolio strategy, market segments you're going to go after, how you're going to position yourselves against competitors, uh, issues like this, whether you're going to cannibalize yourselves or replace with a replacement of a new and better. Now, the tactical decisions can be finalized later, and those tactical decisions are things like pricing, packaging, placement, and they can be fine-tuned over time as you're learning more about the market and the consumer's demand. I want to take a step back to think about what the organization as a whole has to start thinking about early on in the process. They really have to understand the product life cycle of their entire set of products. The reason is because products over time follow a very specific pattern. They start out small market size, as you see in the graph here. They get through to the early adopters. They then grow, and over time, they reach the larger majority. And then over time, they start to decline as other products come on board and do better than they do. So an organization needs to understand, as I said, the width of its product line and where each of the products are, because they need to figure out how they're going to not only replace the revenue that's brought in or the profits that are brought in from a specific product, but they have to figure out how they're going to actually increase them because shareholders demand growth. So there's an important urgency to understand when you talk about portfolio management where you are and where you're going to be in the next couple of years and what you have to start thinking about in terms of new product development. So management now knows what their future revenues and profits are going to look like because some products are coming up and growing in sales and some are declining, and they have to figure out what they're going to do. They also have to figure out for these new products that they're going to come out with, how are they going to compete against the market? What's the point of differentiation? Are they going to compete on price, on quality, on what? Who are they going to compare themselves to? And what is the advantage that they have that's hopefully defensible? Do they have better manufacturing techniques, patents? What is it that's going to allow them in that product, and which might become a platform for a lot of spin-off products? What's going to be the advantage that they can hold on to and stop competitors from eating against their margins and their profits? That is the key question. Another thing they have to consider when they're looking to bring on new products to augment what they already have is, are they going to cannibalize their existing product lines, or are they going to replace them with just new features? So, for example, Kodak chose not to cannibalize their film, which they thought was the big business, and as a result lost the digital camera industry. This is a key decision. If you're stuck too much on what you have and you're not seeing what the real changes in the marketplace, you lose. The next, they have to start thinking about, okay, we got to come out with some new products. What are those products going to be? What type of products do we want them to be? Do we want to just sustain what we already have and maybe have derivative products and make some feature enhancements, or extend a product line on a platform that we have that we know is successful, like Crest toothpaste, for example? Or are we going to be disruptive, like Uber did to the taxi industry, or some of these, I can't remember the name of them, but there are many examples of companies that totally disrupted an industry. And that's a decision that has to be made. because it has a lot of impact in terms of how much money you have to spend to come out with the new enhancement or the new disruptive product. For example, disruptive products, you typically have to do a lot more research and you have to spend a lot of money to educate the consumers on why this is a better idea and get them used to it as you come up the curve of the market share. So, very big strategic decision. What is your innovation strategy? And all that thinking and planning is kind of useless if you don't understand what your capabilities and capacity is. So, you've got this great innovation strategy and business strategy, but you don't have the people or the talent or this money to do this. And this is where the art of portfolio management comes into play. We saw that in the case of the Petit chef, where there are different levels of what you invest in. And the optimal level is what you do to maximize the length of your winners, your cash cows, the ones that are at the top of the market growth and they're doing great, but also make sure that you're replacing the ones that are on the downward slope and doing it in a way that is creating competitive advantage, something you can defend, and something that grows your revenues for your shareholders. As you may recall, the next thing we talked about to date is, well, you have this great strategy, you figured out your capacity issues and financing issues and talent issues. Now, how are you going to manage this development process? And we saw evolution over the last couple of decades of a number of different things, starting with Robert Cooper's stage gate management process to lead users, the Indio design, do it fast, fail fast, do it again and again until you get it right. The Amazon approach of writing the product description and press release first, and then the lean agile approaches, and now what Cooper has been talking about in terms of AI augmented design and product development, which is kind of where I focus this course. So that's another thing that organizations have to do right. And all of that we've talked about to date still has another hurdle, which is organizational culture. And basically, is the culture going to accept change, or are they so ingrained in their little processes that they just reject it? Is top management going to force the issue and make it happen? Or is top management just going to take a laissez-faire attitude and see what happens? The organizational culture was the major issue with the Microsoft case, where it went from a not invented here type of approach where everyone was stuck in their own little vision of what was right, to one of continuous learning and open minds. And it changed the company's trajectory around, and it became pretty well known, I think. So all of those issues together are like the high level issues that impact how successful the organization is going to be in this process known as design and product development. And here's a quick story. The Dyson that is DC01 had 5,127 prototypes before they finally hit on one that was successful. Now, that's stubborn. Or you could say it's not stubborn. You could say that's organizational patience, backed by a financial model that could sustain iterative testing. Now, importantly, not every company can. Smaller companies are at a disadvantage that they do not have the time or the financing to sustain such a patient approach. But this is just one example of how cultures and organizations change, and certain organizations have those resources. They can do things that others can't, and they can come out with product ideas that might be disruptive. On the other hand, the small lean ones, they don't have a whole lot of money. They don't have a whole lot of products that are in their portfolio. They can just shoot for the moon and get ahead of everyone if they do it right and try to be disruptive. Again, the Uber case. So all of that was the big picture, and I just wanted to set the stage for where we're at and where we're going from here. And right now we're going to talk about act number 2, which is the product test. And it's act number 2 because we've already gone through stages that talked about the concept test. The concept test is you built a business case, you have a prototype. Now, let's see, can your organization execute? And the key here is that this cross-functional coordination basically holds together or it falls apart. And right here is where you start to see whether or not you're going to succeed, or if you don't change course, you're going to fail. I just want to take a moment here to talk about a critical distinction that even most product managers sometimes miss, which is there's a big difference between the concept test and the product use test. The concept test, you're just testing the idea. Is this something that, there's no prototype required. You're just asking, is this something that's going to resonate well with our target consumer market? Is this something that might be a good addition to our product line? Does it meet some needs that are unfulfilled? In the next phase, which we're getting into now, the product use test, this phase requires a prototype. You have to be able to show what you're doing and how it benefits a potential user. And you're going to actually try to test the user experience. How well do they understand this without detailed explanation, or does it require education to the consumer? Is it easy to use? Is it easy to understand? Is something that is appealing to them? So you're getting actual key input about whether or not they would purchase it, probably or not, and would they repeat purchase? That's important. And what product refinements are required to actually meet what they really, really want. Now, this phase, product use testing, it follows a progression. Think of it as a testing ladder. And look here at the chart here. You have an alpha phase. Actually, you have a pre-use reaction, which is basically saying, we had an idea, we did some minor tweaks, we got some preference testing, and we're going from there into what we call our alpha testing. The alpha test comes first, and this is internal. Your own team uses the product to validate basic functionality and catch showstopper defects. It's controlled, it's safe, and it's essential because you never want your first external impression to be a broken product. Next is the beta phase. And this is where stuff gets real. You put the product in customers' hands at their sites, in their environments. The goal is straightforward. Does it work as expected when we're not controlling the conditions? But here's a critical warning, and I've seen this kill products at J&J and in consulting engagements. If beta testing happens too late in the process, any changes it reveals become prohibitively expensive. You're already committed to manufacturing specs. You've already locked in supplier contracts. The time to discover problems is in the beta test. The time to fix them affordably is also in the beta test phase. Now, gamma testing applies to complex industrial products that need extended evaluation periods. Think of it like medical devices or enterprise software or heavy equipment. These require months, sometimes years of validation. We see that in testing for new products, drugs, and medical procedures. So this beta test phase is very important, and it's really important to know how to pick your beta testers because the quality of your beta testers helps tremendously in deciding whether or not the idea is good or what needs to be improved. And here's the thing. First, who are they? What are these people about? Well, these are people that want early experiences with new technologies. In competitive industries, being the first to learn a new tool is valuable. Second, they want to influence the design. They're betting that if they participate, the final product will meet their needs better. Third, they anticipate a price advantage when the product officially launches. And fourth, they enjoy the attention. Dedicated vendor personnel, priority support, feeling like an insider. Now, notice something about this list. Every reason is self-interested. Now, that's not cynical, that's useful. When you're recruiting beta customers, you need to sell these benefits explicitly. Don't assume goodwill. make the value proposition clear. Let's take a look at the other side when customers say no to participation in a beta test. And it's important to know this because you need to figure out if you can overcome those objections and get valuable customers to get involved. So the issue is the benefits are uncertain. From their perspective, they're being asked to invest time and risk disruption for a product that might not even work yet. The time commitment's real. Beta testing isn't passive. It requires meetings, structured feedback, documentation, and for critical business functions, customers may need to run parallel systems, old and new simultaneously, which doubles their operational burden. Now, here's why this matters for cross-functional execution. Getting the right beta customers isn't just a sales problem or a marketing problem. Sales has the relationships, marketing defines the customer criteria, R&D has the technical requirements for what constitutes a valid test. If those three departments aren't coordinating on beta customers recruitment, you either get the wrong testers or not enough testers. Either way, your validation data is compromised. So if you're in a position where you have to participate in putting together a beta group, here are the 11 key decisions for product use testing. These need to be made for every product use test. And I want you to really look at this list, and I'll distribute the PowerPoint presentation so you don't have to take notes. But the first thing you'll notice is how diverse these questions are. Question 1 to 3, who to test with, how to reach them, whether to reveal your identity. Those sound like marketing questions. Questions 4 and 5, how much to explain, how much control. Oh, those are R&D questions. Question 7, the time period. That's a resource allocation question that finance cares deeply about. Question 8, prototype versus pilot run versus final production. That's manufacturing's call. And question 11, the big one at the bottom, which functional group is actually responsible for running this test? The answer to that last question, it depends. And that's the point. There is no universal template. The answers vary by company, by product, by market, which means someone has to coordinate all of this. Someone has to make sure 11 different decisions owned by different departments all align. That someone is often the product manager, and that might be you. Now, let's take a quick look at the same 11 decisions through a different lens. Who actually owns each one? And look at the color legend, and you see the decisions are spread out amongst different groups. Marketing owns the customer-facing decisions, who to test with and how to reach them. R&D owns the technical decisions, how much to explain and how much to control the testing environment. Manufacturing owns the production decisions, whether you're testing a prototype, a pilot run, or final production unit. And what forms the product takes. Finance weighs in on timing and resource allocation. And notice how many of these are shared. Company identity, disclosure, test methodology, interpreting results, and the big question of who's in charge. So the visual tells you everything about why cross-functional execution is hard. There's no single department can run a product use test alone. 5 different groups, 11 different decisions, and they all need to align, because when they don't, and in my 30 years of consulting, I've seen this happen dozens of times, the test either produces bad data or produces good data that nobody trusts. I'm a big believer in best practices, and here are 5 best practices that sound simple, but get violated constantly. So let's take a look at the list. Number 1, pick test sites carefully. Oh, that sounds obvious, but I've seen companies choose beta sites based on convenience rather than representation. Your test site needs to mirror actual use conditions. Number 2, get everything in writing before the test starts. What are the expectations, the timelines, the confidentiality? When things go wrong mid-test, and they will, Have written agreements prevent he said, she said type of disputes. Number 3, have someone on site or readily available. A field trial that hits a technical snag with no support person available doesn't produce useful data. It produces frustrated and angry customers. Number 4, get the customer to sign off on results. Both parties need to agree on what happened before you act on the data. And number 5, and this is the one teams skip more often, specify what happens if the test succeeds and what happens if it fails before you run the test. This prevents emotional decision making and falling in love with the idea after the fact. When you don't pre-specify criteria, people will rationalize bad results and move forward anyway. That's how products that should have been killed survive into launch and fail expensively. So as we wrap up Act 2 of the product use test, I want to leave this thought with you. That is that people who learn to coordinate across departments during this testing, validation, and launch phase, those are the ones that organizations promote into leadership positions, because that's the hardest, rarest skill in product development. And those people are very, very highly valued. So as we leave Act 2, the product use test, we move into the next phase, which is the market test. And here's where we've been in this chart. You see that the concept test validated the idea, the product use testing validated the product, field test validated its work in real conditions. Now you're ready for market testing. But here's the shift that happens at this point. Everything we've discussed so far, test the product in isolation. Does it work? Is it what consumers want? Market testing changes the game entirely, because now you're testing the product plus price, plus promotion, plus distribution, plus competition, the full marketing mix. This is the dress rehearsal for the launch. And it's where the organizational gauntlet gets really interesting, because now every department has skin in the game simultaneously. So for a successful market test, everything has to work smoothly. The gears have to move very well together, like a well-oiled machine, right? So the product has to be there, the design, the technical performance, the organization support has to be there, the culture to take it from an idea to market, the industry, supply chains, partners, competitors, they have to be well understood and taken into account. And it's only when all these things work well together that a product gets the green light, because the gears weren't stuck. And just to drive home the point about how successful organizational interaction and coordination makes a difference, I want to just point out the Apple counter example. And this is where they really worked well together. They understood the hardware met the needs of the user, the software was there, the carrier relationships, AT&T, were there to sell at the front line. The retail Apple Store was redesigned to allow demos and touch demos, and have people experience the feeling of using their smartphone. And marketing understood all this and came out and basically used a very simple, confident, and approach and let the product speak for itself. All were properly aligned and all did a pretty good job, I must say. I think you'd agree. So from both the product side and the marketing side, they've gone through these first two phases of the concept test and the product use test, and now they're ready for the marketing component test. And the market test has basically 3 tiers, and each represents a different trade-off between speed, cost, and realism. So on the far bottom here on the left, you have pseudo cells, and this is where you get the quickest and cheapest test, but they're also the least real in terms of simulation of test markets. And these basically, you have salespeople go in and present a product like it was real with actual marketing materials, etc. And it's like them using a flight simulator to learn how to fly. Great. You actually test it, see what some reaction is from the customer. That's quick and easy and cheap. In the middle, you have a controlled sales environment. And this is informal selling. It's direct marketing, perhaps, or mini markets or scanner testing. These involve actually selling activity, but in controlled environments. More realistic than pseudo sales, more manageable than full deployment. So it's in the middle. And at the bottom right here, you have the full sales test markets and rollouts. This is the full dress rehearsal. Real customers, real stores, real competition, real pricing, real packaging, etc. It's all real. And it's the most expensive and slowest approach, but it generates the most reliable data. Now, the art of new product development is choosing the right tier for your product at the right point in time with your situation. And that choice itself is a cross-functional decision. So let's break each one down. And I just threw this slide in there, so when you're reviewing the slides, if you ever get the chance to, you'll know that this is the details of what we just spoke about. So the first of the approaches is the pseudo sales, and it can be a simulated test markets or speculative sales. With simulated test markets, you might get consumers some packaged goods and get estimates on whether or not they tried it, and if they would, how often would they repeat? What's the probability of being a repeat purchaser? And this is calculated on 100% awareness and availability of the product, which is not always, it's not true all the time. We'll get into that and how these numbers lie and lie. So as I say, numbers, figures liar and liars figure, right? So we'll get into some of the drawbacks on this one. Speculative sales, again, is when you have your salesperson go in with a folder, marketing materials, uh, fancy glossary pictures of the product or whatever it might be, and work with a buyer at a company and gives their pitch and gets feedback. Again, very fast. Often the products may not even be in R&D yet. It just might be an idea that's been thrown up across the deck. Funny story. There's a lot of people that do this now on Reddit. They'll post something like, "I'm thinking of doing this. What do you else think?" And the approach is, they're small. They don't have the money for a real time, taking their time on doing these things, nor the money to invest in some of these more expensive approaches. So what they'll do is they'll just say, okay, if I get 20 people that would say they would go on a GoFundMe site and support me, then I'll develop something. If not, then I won't. So again, a traditional method that's been applied towards the new economy. Now, as mentioned earlier, the next step is what they call the simulated test markets, or STMs. These are where you're actually trying to understand whether or not consumers would try your product and whether they'd be a repeat purchaser or not. And these numbers that you get from tests go into something called an ATAR forecasting model. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. The trial and repeat estimates, though, get this, assuming 100% awareness and 100% availability of the product. And that's not always the case. You might face shelf configurations that are not favorable. Competitors might be running a promotion that's not going to be common, but it's just blowing you out of the water with the price that they're offering. Or a number of different things. Packaging might be for the wrong market, bad for the wrong market. So it's not really getting a lot of very valuable data on things you need to improve. It's just getting a quick simulation of what trial and repeat purchase might be. You have to do everything else right. Just a little bit more information on the speculative sales, because I've had to do these in my history. It's you really have to have some good salespeople, and the customers are not being told what they have is vaporware, but the salesperson has to make it seem like this is a product that we're just about to go to market with, and we're trying to get feedback on. It's maybe and it's about to enter the beta phase, as an example. So it's basically trying to measure genuine buyer intent and interest in somewhat of a realistic selling environment, and that's especially good for you know, industrial items where you're selling to corporations and talking to the purchasing agent, or it could also be in supermarkets where you have these end aisle trays set up by these lovely ladies that are handing out free samples. And the idea is, it's early on. It's a cheap way of getting feedback and seeing what people think. Now, this next phase of the market testing hierarchy has four components, and this is before you get to a full test market, for example. But you have informal selling, which is a step beyond the speculative selling because you might now have a product that you can actually sell. You have direct marketing where you're offering coupons and things like that, or calling this number to get your sample, whatever, and trying to gauge interest and intent. Then you have your mini markets where basically small trial size versions are available and you see how they move. And then you have your scanner market testing information where the scanner on your product is picked up and the data is immediately fed into the system that can be used for analysis. How well is this product doing in the test market? And just as before, I added this chart so that you can dive a little deeper into the explanation of what each of these components are. And now we get to the last component of market testing, which is traditional test markets or a rollout. And traditional test markets, Boise, Idaho, and others are well known for being a cross representation of the American public. And rollouts allow you to go into a particular zone and see how it's doing, and then roll out. And that actually lets you do some more tailoring to the specific needs of that particular area. And here's the TLTR for this test market. And I said that because I never thought I'd be able to say TLTR in the presentation, keep a straight face, but I just did. Anyway, everything is real. The markets are real, the competition's real, the pricing, the packaging, all of that is real. It is the slowest way to do your test, but it gives you the most information. It's also most expensive. And it is really a good example of what's going to happen in the real world, unless your competitors get wind of your test market ahead of time and they flood it with some promotions or some such marketing to obscure your results and cloud the data. But for the most part, it's a very, very valuable component, and it is certainly something that's been tried and true. And here's just a quick reference chart to lay out the three different approaches and what they require, how expensive they are, what type of information they give you. Now, this slide I'm not going to go through, but it's an important one for you to keep. And it tells you what's appropriate in terms of the methodology to use for what different type of product you have, because not all test methods are appropriate for all different types of products or services. So, for example, for an individual good, speculative sales are good, but a simulated test market, not so good. For consumer packaging, informal selling and direct marketing might not be all that great. So just keep this on hand. It's not ironclad, but it gives you a heads up in terms of questions you need to ask and verify before you go and choose a particular type of approach. So we had test markets we just looked at, and another strategy that companies use is, and its preferred method actually is, it's the rollout strategy. And this is where you go and pick a particular geography and launch it in that area. It's something you can keep a handle on, get information faster because you're really observing it close up, and you have the opportunity to see what's working and what's not and fix it before you go on and roll out and put more money into the rollout. So, basically these typically start with an individual channel and they build credibility outward. And the rollouts have a certain signal to the competitors that a total launch is forthcoming. But failures in one market get fixed before the next. So they're very valuable. So earlier, I mentioned this thing called an ATAR model, and it's one of two models that companies typically use to help them forecast what's going to happen. And this is really a workhorse of new product forecasting for consumer packaged goods, mainly consumer packaged goods. So here it's market share equals awareness times trial times availability times repeat. So you multiply that by market size to get long run sales. Then you apply your margin to get profits. It's elegant, it's simple, and it's dangerously dependent on the quality of your inputs. So let's break down the four components, okay? So awareness. What percentage of your target market will actually hear about this product? Now, this depends on your advertising budget, obviously, your PR strategy, and word of mouth. Trial of those who are aware, what percentage will actually try it? Now, this comes from your concept test data. Availability, what percentage of potential purchase occasions will your product actually be on the shelf? And now, this is a distribution and channel management question. And repeat, of those who try it, how many will buy again and how often? And this comes from your product use testing data. Now, notice that each of these components comes from a different research phase and a different functional area. Awareness is marketing. Trial is a joint marketing and R&D outcome from concept testing. Availability is sales and distribution. Repeat is R&D and product quality. The ATAR model is inherently cross-functional, which is a good thing, right? Now, let me just point out one thing about using this ATAR test. So you're calculating trial rate from concept tests and, purchase intention scale. You had definitely would buy, probably would buy, and you get check marks in those top two boxes. And what people tend to do is they say, okay, that combination is the starting point. And that's what we're looking at in terms of trial. That's not even close because it needs to have historical adjustments made. What happens in the spring if it's a certain type of athletic wear? Well, it's probably going to be more in demand in the winter. So you need to accommodate the historical significance of the timing of year and the location. So adjustments have to be made to this data to give it any sort of sense of real importance. Now, this is an interesting slide, and it sort of gives you an idea of why the product development process exists in the order it does. So you see that as you're going through basic market research, concept tests, product use tests, component tests, market tests, etc., you're getting various pieces of information that are very, very important. So the ones in green are shown as sources, very, very helpful. And you have several supplementary sources. Now, trial data comes best from concept tests. Repeat and adoption data comes best from product use testing. Awareness and availability data comes best from market testing. Notice the pattern. You literally cannot gather all the ATAR inputs at the same time. Trial data requires a concept test, which happens early. Repeat data requires a product use test, which requires a prototype, which comes later. Availability data requires a market test, which comes later still. So this is why the stage gate process is sequential. Not because someone arbitrarily decided it should be, but because the data you need at each stage can only be generated by the activities that precede it. Skip a stage and you're forecasting with missing data. And forecasting with missing data is just guessing with a spreadsheet. So as I mentioned, the ATAR method is one of two very well-known and well-followed approaches. The other is basis. Basis projections gives a unique way for capturing data that can be utilized. And it's got some real limitations, and I'll go over those in a second. But basically, let me show you a table of what it looks like. So this is where you might get the actual data coming from your tests. And if I can see here, basically awareness, trial, repeat, all these are based on the quality of the product as well as the distribution ability of the product. And it multiplies out. And you come down at the bottom here with something you can compare against each other. So in markets that we have high awareness and high distribution and are very wealthy, we're probably going to do okay. And other markets that are same product might not do so well. So it tells you some very important information that helps your forecasting. So I come back to the old phrase I mentioned earlier, which is figures lie and liars figure. So, the ATAR issue is you don't have all the data. And with basis, it does not account for, company strategic goals. Are they going to be aligned with this new idea for implementation? Is the culture going to accept it? What are the target market dynamics? How is the competition going to react? None of that is included. And therefore you have to think, this is just a starting point. It's not something that we can bet the farm on either. Barns on the farm. And as we wrap up this market test phase, it comes back again to the role of product management. And it's not just their job to design the product, but they also have to figure out how to design the best testing program to validate the product and one that can get through the organization and effectively manage all the components together to make this a smooth weapon that moves through. Okay, next act, the launch. You've gotten through the concept phase, you've gotten through the product use phase, you've gotten through the market test phase. You're using ATAR, you're using basis information, you're getting projections. Finance people say, let's go. Salespeople say, let's go, etc. Everybody's on board, and it's time to get to the market. So you're not done yet, okay? So there's still decisions that have to be made in the planning, the launch of a new product. And this is a frantic time in product marketing department. And there's certain things that I'm going to go over that are components of what you have to decide and what you have to address as you're getting ready to launch. So the first thing you have to think about is what's known as permanence. Now, high permanence is the permanence in general is related to risk. And high permanence is something that when you make a decision such as your brand identity and naming, that's a permanent thing. And you get that wrong, it's very risky, right? Your core pricing model, that's permanent. You might have coupons, but basically your core pricing model is where you position yourself for competition. It's a permanent issue. The physical hardware or the distribution channels or the partnerships, all those are very important decisions, which are big decisions, and there's high permanence. Get them right, get them done early. The low permanence ones are, you can make changes. So your digital ad copy, your creative approach, your landing page on an application or a SaaS application. These are not as critical, but they have to be done, and you need to coordinate with all the departments to get them done. So as we're getting ready for this strategic launch decision, you have the different groups, different concerns. Product concerns are, is the product and service well designed? Did we get the right market segments? Is the timing of the launch right? Where are we launching ice hockey skates in springtime? Not a good time. Is the business strategy appropriate? Are we changing our focus from what our strength is to something that makes no sense whatsoever? Is production smooth? Do we have good supply chain management, et cetera? The organizational concerns are things like, what's your team structure for new product development? And what's the organizational culture like to support that? What's the overall company strategy? And that drives culture, which can drive the support for new product development. How about the market orientation and the culture of how fast you go to market? All those are concerns. And as many of you know, I'm not a big fan of minimal viable products anymore, but that's one of the decisions you make in this phase. And then you have the industry concerns. What's the technology environment? So we have a technology environment today where every 2 weeks you seem to be getting a new version of a very powerful application. It's crazy time to keep up with all this stuff. How about your customers? Who are they and what are their changing demographics? What about the logistics, the partners and suppliers that you have to work with? What about the competitors? What do they typically do? How savage are they? All these are things you need to consider as you're getting ready for launch because it impacts what you're going to do. So one of the things it impacts is just how aggressive are you going to be in terms of your launch? Are you going to be very aggressive where you have a large advertising expenditure and you have freestanding coupon inserts or Fiskies as they're called? Do you do trial sizes, intro promotions, um, distribution discounts to get in an optimal shelf space? How about the other approach is you can take a cautious approach. You basically keep things as they are and do the slow growth, um, and you don't make big waves. And the other is a balanced approach. Well, that happens quite a frequent time, obviously, and that differs for every company. Another thing that goes into the launch strategy is just what's the newness of this new concept, new product. So, for example, when Apple came out with the iPod, and then with the iPhone, it wasn't something that people understood at first. And Steve Jobs once said something to the effect of, "How can you count on them for market research information when they don't know what the art of the possible is, what's conceptually available, what can be done?" So people aren't ready to give you that; they're not ready to understand it. And this also comes into the stages of growth and crossing the chasm. So the newness of a launch product really impacts. You're going to have to spend more to get awareness. You're going to have to educate the consumer on the benefits, which is more expensive. You're going to have to do a lot of uh, promotional activity that you might not have to do if it was just a derivative product or an extension of a product platform. And then there's the other decision you have to make. Do you want to be first to market and get what are used to be known as first mover advantages? Well, first mover also has first mover risks. And if you think about a lot of products that have been huge in the last couple of decades, there was VisiCalc, which became Lotus 123, which became Excel, which has now become whatever, Google Sheets, or some sort of AI tool that's embedded in those things. First to market is not always defensible. And if you're going to take a first to market position, you better build a moat around your product in terms of doing things that make it defensible and make it very hard for customers to stop using your product. So this is a decision how you're going to handle that. That's part of the launch strategy. And of course, I haven't even touched on the 4Ps yet: promotion, pricing, packaging, product, all those things, sales and distribution, which is placement. All these things have to be considered, and here's basically when they are most effectively used. And this is, again, a reference chart for you to take with you. Another thing to consider is the actual launch cycle. And I say that because you have two things here. On the top is the typical classic product life cycle. That's, starts out slow, builds up over time, then dies over time. The launch cycle is much different in terms of the amount of money, expenditures you're making versus what you're getting in terms of revenues. And it might not be for a year until you start to break even. And then hopefully you'll start to make the type of money that's seen on the top chart. Another thing to consider, and boy, I told you this was going to be a long presentation. Another thing to consider is the adoption curve. And this is from Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. And what it says here is that, when you're coming out with a new idea, a new product, you're going to get these early, enthusiasts. That's going to be part of your early market. You're going to get early adopters. And those are people that are willing to try something different. And they are very excited about newness. They're excited about changing the paradigm. Getting from there to the initial large market takes some doing. And then building on your reputation there to get to the conservatives. And then finally, the people at the end. It's all part of the strategy, how you're going to do that. Now, here are some examples of people's reactions about why they're interested in it. So in this Crossing the Chasm, the early adopters are people who are motivated by the future. They want revolutionary change and are willing to accept sloppiness early on because they see the possibility, they see the future. And they're going to tolerate bugs and incomplete features. These are people that accept these high risks for what they presume are high rewards. These are also the type of people that are called lead users. They create their own solutions, and that happens a lot in the software industry with open source code. On the other hand, you have the early majority people, and these are pragmatists. They want to see proof. They want to hear stories about what it did for others. They want to see the numbers. They're very risk averse, analytical, and they're motivated by how does it help me now? So very different cultures. You need to address and appeal to them both to be a success. So how do you get people across the chasm? Well, studies have shown there are 6 factors that drive adoption. The how much better is this item than existing solutions? And does it fit with existing values, experiences, and needs? Is it easy to understand and use, or is it hard? That's not going to be good if it's hard. Can customers try it before committing fully? That's always important. And can others see the results of using it? Well, if it's not going to be something that's noticeable, why do I care? And then what is the perceived downside of adopting it? So, for example, if I try this new software and my company goes bankrupt because it made so many errors, that's not too good. But, so these are the things that if you can assuage them, you're going to get faster acceptance. And it's quite interesting that people are often driven by this fear of being left out. And they're looking for stories of success that they can relate to. And this is part of the more strategies in terms of how you cross the chasm. And the first is you establish a beachhead. It's the bowling ball principle. You establish a beachhead with one particular niche, and then you either go to a similar niche or you change your product slightly and appeal to another niche, and you start to expand to other markets. The other is the mass market acceleration. And this is where if you put enough energy into a rollout and make it really exciting, such as what Apple always does, people have a fear of being left out. And the social anxiety of being left out often motivates people to accept these new concepts faster. Now, as you can imagine, once again, crossing the chasm is a cross-functional test of an organization. And here are the things that different groups need to do. Now, let's finish this up with Act 5, which is the scorecard. So we walk through this phases of this, from concept to product use test to market test to the launch. How do you actually measure how well you're doing? Because this is a really critical thing if you want your company to survive over time. So there are 2 ways the companies do this. First is they look at the product level metrics. How are we doing time to market versus the plan? Are we hitting our budgets for development costs? How's the quality of our products? What's the market share we achieved versus what we forecasted? Those are all at the project level. The firm level is, uh, how much revenue are we getting from recent launches? How are we keeping our company viral? Virility is an important index. What about the return on innovation investment? What about the portfolio balance across risk levels? And how about the pipeline and the health of our innovation pipeline? Are we coming up with ideas that we can constantly be trying as we want to grow our revenues and profits for our shareholders? All of these are the starting points of what the companies need to be measured on, and often are by Wall Street. And the last thing I'll leave you with is this sort of a reference chart of what Nielsen said are the 12 product success factors, and salience, point of purchase, attraction, and endurance. And you can see those each. So I want to wrap this up. I'm trying to, as you can see, trying to get through this last couple of slides quickly. What the Gauntlet teaches you is that coordination becomes indispensable. The models inform, but they do not decide. There's not enough data there. It's not sophisticated enough yet to capture what needs to be a real representation until you get to the market test. And the chasm, and crossing the chasm, is an organizational challenge. It's not just the product manager's challenge. It's an organizational challenge. You have different groups you have to appeal to, and you got to work together to figure that out. So let me start to wrap this up here and mention that, remember the 70% we talked about an hour ago? And I wanted to say then that those were execution failures, not idea failures. So that was just a number back then, and now you understand why. You've seen this testing gauntlet. You've seen how 5 departments with competing priorities must coordinate on 11 different decisions just for product use testing. You've seen how market testing requires choosing the right tier for the right situation. You've seen how financial models can mislead as easily as they inform. You've seen the chasm and why it's an organizational challenge, not a marketing one. Now you know what to do about it. Okay, so I promise this is the last slide. So the key takeaways from this video. Number 1, concept testing, test the concepts. The product use test the products. Market test the full marketing mix of 4 Ps, the competition, the geography, etc. There are 3 tiers of market testing: the pseudo, the controlled, and the full, and each trades speed and cost for realism. The ATAR model, which measures awareness, trial, availability, and repeat, is the workhorse forecasting tool, but it's only as good as the inputs. The basis model, also only as good as the inputs. The financial models inform decisions, but don't ever depend on them to make them, because they do not consider everything, such as goals, competition, trends, etc. The adoption curve, or the crossing the chasm, has 5 segments. The chasm exists between the early adopters and the early majority, and that's where most products die. So there are different techniques you can use to get past that, but it requires simultaneous change across marketing, sales, product, and support. And this cross-functional coordination is the rarest and most promotable skill in product development. So I hope all this information was useful, and I hope you can refer back to this as you need it in your career. Best of luck to you.